I'm Dane Rose, and in this map, I wanted to go through points in my own life where, a variety of different confusing messages have been presented to me, and I've always looked for presentations that help me make sense of how these all different bits fit together. You may have, for example, run into the Buddhist teaching of not being attached, and also noticed, as I have, how attached many, particularly Western Buddhists, are to being unattached. And it's that kind of paradoxical unraveling that I want to lay out here. It's not complete, and its purpose is to give depth by providing counterpoint, because we have two eyes, specifically because they see reality differently. When I close this eye, I see a slightly different version than this eye. And it's when you combine those two together that you get depth perception. Similarly, whenever you look at a paradox, something where it seems like if this is true, then this can't be true, there's often room for a paradoxical insight. So one of the, and I'll use my own life as reference points, but one of the things that I learned early on in my teens was the importance of a positive attitude. And this is incredibly powerful in goal accomplishment and the like. The flip side of that is that in order to see clearly, in order to see anything clearly, you need contrast. And so the reason you can see a word like this is precisely because you have white against black. Now, we get the clearest vision of reality when we give equal attention to what's good and what's bad relative to our value hierarchy. Meaning, if we value money, then when we do a business practice that makes more money, that's a good practice. When we do a practice that wastes money, that's a bad practice. Now, you can only focus on the positive, which is similar to only looking at the income in a balance statement. But you get the clearest view when you accurately analyze both the positive and the negative and grade them. This is a very big expense. If we could cut this expense down by half, our business could be profitable. This is a little expense. It's not a big deal. And one of the traps to potentially fall into along these lines is being lectured by people who it's not in their interest for you to see certain destructive behaviors, etc., that are often coming from them or that are in the environment, but that they don't know how to deal with any more than you do. And so if you bring up, our government is, it's really off here. Why are we spending tax monies to make this worse over here? There will be a message, particularly in growth communities, to look on the positive. In other words, don't examine the negative. And I would say the opposite. I would say look at the positive of any situation and the negative of any situation, and weigh them so that you can guide yourself more effectively into more beneficial terrain based on what you value. Now, another thing that is, running around in the growth circles is the idea to get rid of the story. And this comes from the awareness that, in truth, we're not actually dealing with reality. Our senses create a map for us to comprehend reality physically. And our mind and our heart creates a map to comprehend reality mentally and emotionally. But these are not reality. These are our creation in order for us to allow an interaction with reality. Now, the question then in the analysis of are you in story is, for example, a question you might get. Well, first of all, we're always in story. And the people who are asking that question about a story are in a story that it's bad to have a story. Otherwise, they don't ask the question. Now, the positive side of being aware of one's story is you can see how accurate it is. And that's the value of becoming conscious of one's story. I have a story that you don't like me because you don't like my haircut. That may be a false story, but only partially false. The truth may be you don't like me because I interrupt you. And if I have an accurate story about that, then I can stop interrupting you, as opposed to saying, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about my hair. So the goal with story is not to eliminate stories, but to create more and more accurate stories by checking them out. And you can do that as simply as saying, I'm under this impression. Could you tell me how you see it? And once you understand the other person's story, because they see it that way, you may be thinking you're providing helpful advice. They may be thinking you're interrupting them. The problem is not with a story. It's when two people have different paradigms that they're using to generate different stories, and then not checking that out, and then, of course, they don't connect. Now, another thing that's popular, for example, in Buddhism or other New Age circles, like, I don't want to be an angry person. And a good way to look at feelings, let's start with the physical. So most people don't want to feel in pain. So if my finger is up there and there's a needle poking into it, my finger is going to communicate to my brain, there's a boundary violation in effect. You are in pain. And if you don't want to be in pain, the thing to do is not to cut the nerve endings, but to look over at the situation, look at the pressure, and either move your finger out of the way or ask someone to stop poking you with the needle or push them away or call the police, etc., until the pain stops. Then your finger will generate a new feeling that says, I'm so relieved I'm not being poked by a needle again. And similarly, emotionally, we all have an emotional body. And depending on how it's built, different behaviors and different situations will stimulate joy, pain, pleasure, the full spectrum of emotion. And it's just like the nervous system. And so if you don't want to feel lonely, for example, the thing is not to say, I don't want to hear about that, go away, lonely feeling, as much as to listen to it and say, aha, who's in there that feels lonely, for example? Okay, emotionally, I feel like I'm 5 years old. Okay, 5-year-old, what are you feeling lonely about? Well, I have a story that nobody likes me. And why do you have that story? No one's looking at me, no one's touching me. And it's like, okay, for a 5-year-old, that makes sense. Thank you for communicating the information. Again, if I want the emotional message to shift, you want to shift the dynamic. Now, that could be, if it's mental emotional pain being generated by a story, stopping and asking someone, is any of this true? It could be going and doing a meditation to help that 5-year-old calm down and be reassured, and also coming into more of an adult age in which you understand that we're in a very self-absorbed culture and everyone's in their little world over there, and it really doesn't have anything to do with you, but still maybe you can create that engagement for your 5-year-old. Find someone who will make eye contact and move around the room until you do that, and then your 5-year-old can say, oh, someone likes me. And so it's not about, the distinction is that it's not about suppressing or denying sensation or feelings, but rather learning from them so that you can be responsible, able and willing to respond. The other thing to understand is the messages of different feelings. For example, anger usually comes up when we're being blocked. For example, road rage. You have this nice, you're looking forward to your adrenaline hit, you want some nice speed on the road, you're moving forward, and what? You're in traffic. So that frustration is the conflict between the desire to flow. The mind, the imagination that says, I want that, that'll feel great, and then the reality, someone's in my way. I'm angry because someone's in my way. Well, when you understand that, you can say, okay, thanks for telling me anger, someone's in my way. You now have the ability to respond. You analyze the situation. Okay, what's my best choice here? Is it to get someone in the carpooling lane and try and partner with someone for the next month? Let's try and find someone, who can do more carpooling with me, and then we get in the fast lane. Is it to get a motorcycle so that I can always race through, the sides, but deal with the traffic risk, the higher death rate? Is it to avoid this time of traffic? And in this situation, maybe I could go and spend some time in a cafe and do some reading, or is this a daily aggravant and I could get a lot of work done if I took an Uber? And so I'm going to get rid of my car, and then I'm stuck in traffic a few hours a day. But by having a chauffeur or an Uber, etc., I can get work done, and it's no longer blocking my flow. Or is this just something? This is the best situation. So then I'll do my breathing technique and say, yeah, it's irritating as heck, and there's nothing I can do about it. So let me focus on something else. Now, another big focus is on, particularly in growth circles, and that's mostly what I'm addressing. I've kind of grown up in, different cultures and communities in a growth-oriented, new age type direction, and so I'm addressing some of the things that have come up in that context that often haven't been integrated. So there's a big bias in many New Age circles towards things that aren't natural. And there's no doubt about it that nature is absolutely fabulous. But, things like, a natural remedy versus a non-natural remedy in health, or a eating naturally versus not eating naturally. And the first thing that, I think is worth noting is that human beings are part of nature, meaning we have this illusion that somehow we're completely dissociated, and that's culturally fostered. However, every single thing we're doing, from a McDonald's hamburger with styrofoam in a loud, music and smoke environment, every bit of that is produced by this planet. The tobacco is grown on the planet, the hamburgers were grown on the planet, the plastic was synthesized, and we are part of nature. That's the first thing. So the idea that nature is always better than synthetic is not actually accurate. Sulfur can kill you in a sulfur cave. So a volcano can blow you up. And so what's a little bit more of a sophisticated view around this natural synthetic thing is to look at the fact that everything has a benefit and a cost, and everything moves us towards wholeness and balance, or further out of symmetry and into dis-ease. Now, if you look at that on multiple layers at different times, you can, for example, I've always eaten organic food wherever possible. I love cooking. And so, all things being equal, I will, dine at a nice organic restaurant with a calm environment, that has a natural feel. That's great. And yet you have things like, a variety of other natural cycles, for example, being hydrated. And so, when is a Gatorade going to be better for the natural hydration within the body than nothing, because you're unhydrated? And when is dealing with a plastic bottle that's not really recyclable better than being unhydrated? And so there's a gradation of different contexts. When you're really poor, for example, and your biggest stress is around money, at what point does, driving an extra 20 minutes out of view, cutting into work, and eating well stress you out so much that your body is actually in worse shape than pulling into a Taco Bell and getting a quick bean and, some protein in your body? Because it's all nature. We're just looking at the fact that within our freedom and our technology, we have created a whole variety of natural concentrations, some of which are ideal for our body, some of which are toxic. And wherever possible, we're wanting to move towards balance and symmetry within the choices available to us. And, I'd rather use Crest toothpaste than not brush my teeth if I'm at a guest's house, despite the fluoride and this chemical and the flavor, and I don't like it. But on the other hand, if I can, I'll go with an organic Sea Fresh toothpaste. And so there's a gradation. It's also worth mentioning that in the ecological framework, there's lots of different, and we come into diet here, there's lots of different tensions. For example, is it better to buy something that's local, and so more fossil fuels haven't been generated in the transportation, that isn't organic, or something that is organic imported from another state or another country? So you've got energy, you've got organic, you've got local, and then you've got the degree, importing a mango from Peru that's organic versus, not eating something that isn't in season. So there's what about the packaging? And usually you find a little bit of a tension. For example, the raw foods, which is another version of health, so you get certain benefits. But I notice a lot of the raw food isn't organic. So, which is better for your body and which do you want to support? And this is unfortunately in a low level of science, meaning there's very little studies that will help map that out, in part because it's a very unique thing. What if you're helping an organic farm get started in Peru and, then shipping it across in gas guzzling ships and then trucks and then this and that and the other. And so a general rule of thumb is that what's best for the ecology, which always on itself, the Earth always goes back to stasis on its own. Meaning if we just stop doing anything, stop building things, stop driving, the Earth will reclaim more and more of the environment and move itself back to stasis. And so on that level, the most ecological thing we can do is save energy. Just don't go on a vacation, and you will conserve jet fuel and electricity and taxis and car manufacturing and stuff like that. Don't do a remodel, and you'll consume all the stuff that would go in a landfill and stuff. And so there's a tension between the recycled and, which you can import recycled things from halfway around the world, and the gas being consumed in that transportation is not recycled, and so it's a complex field. But in general, conserving energy makes things more efficient, lowers cost, and reduces environmental impact. Another thing is ego. And I would just close the natural versus synthetic thing to say that there are synthetic adaptations that improve health. For example, if you go to tribes and look at their tubers, if they're eating a root tuber, they may boil them 6 times to get the toxin out of the natural tuber and bring it down to a point where it's not as toxic to the body. Well, it might be more natural just to use a carefully bred organic potato that's already, through lots of manipulation by human beings. In other words, we're natural too. You've gotten those toxins out just by having a carefully curated potato that was grown for human beings. It started out in the wild, and people wanted bigger fruit and sweeter fruit and all of that. So it's not as clear, this distinction between natural is better. Otherwise, people would have stayed eating the semi-sour tiny apples that were horrible and all that. We get into ego, and this is a big area because ego is generally seen as a very bad thing. Ego is the zoom-in lens that gives us an individual relationship with reality. Ego is the part that says, this is me. In a materialistic sense, that's my body. In a slightly larger sense, these are my thoughts, these are my feelings, these are my body. And this is in tension with ecological thinking that says, well, wait a minute. There really isn't a me if you look closely enough. What I mean by this is not my body, this is my parents' body. They produced this body. And after my parents produced this body, my culture participated in raising it. And my body is fed by air from trees. It's fed from food from the earth. It's fed from liquids from the earth. And all of the other things, like I'm wearing this sweater, it's not my cashmere technology. It's not my transportation system. So there's almost nothing that you can point at that's, quote, mine, that does not intricately connect with everything else. So the value of the ego lens is we have responsibility for our choices. And whether, that balance point between not having any sense of who we are and any sense of responsibility, and having a sense and taking responsibility to direct our actions in a way that we consider to be intelligent and good for our ideals, that's the ego's job. And so on the one hand, you have a very large percentage of people who do not formulate their own ideas, their own opinions, take responsibility for their own actions, do their own thinking, but just basically get swept along with the herd. And on the other side, you have counterphobic egos that whatever anyone else is doing, they do the opposite. But it's also not them. It's just, counterphobic. And you actually have a really important need for a healthy, strong sense of ego that says these are my thoughts because I think, these thoughts lead to a better environment, and these thoughts lead to treating my employees better, and I want happier employees, and I want a more beautiful natural world out there, and I want to protect this river, and so I am going to do this. All of that is ego. And so, knowing what's healthy, when raising your hand in the board, in the board meeting and saying, no, I really don't agree with that, and if it comes to it, I'll resign from this board because I think this and this and this. Where's that healthy ego, which is at times missing, and what's often referred to as an immature ego. An ego that may be doing what everyone else is doing, in that sense isn't developed because we don't even know who we are and we haven't thought things through. But, for example, if we didn't get enough attention as a child, that part is still screaming out for attention. And so when that person is doing a lot of things to say, look at me, then we say, well, that person is in ego. We're all looking through the ego lens, but that person may have an undeveloped ego, an immature ego, and that is not just about them. Meaning, when you have a healthy culture and you have a healthy family, you develop a mature ego. So you can focus through the egotistical lens on one person and say, well, you're immature. But you don't get immature people without an immature environment. The environment is responsible for the probability field. So, this is a really important thing to be aware of. If you're in a culture, for example, in America, 1 in 7 Americans has a substance addiction, and a majority of Americans have a compulsive relationship with thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Now, that's not random, and that has nothing to do with those individuals on an individual level. It has to do with the fact that we are a trauma-illiterate culture. So we produce a lot of trauma, and then we don't educate people about trauma, so we don't repair trauma. And addiction is a coping mechanism for trauma, among other things. So when you say, okay, this is a culture that is dealing with, 60% addiction, what you're saying is this is a culture that induces 60% of its population into trauma and then doesn't educate them on how to deal with it. And that will not fix on an individual level. That is fixed on an ecological level, on a cultural level, by turning our attention as individuals on the culture and saying, I don't want my kids to grow up like I did. And so what are the variables? And so you don't actually focus so much on the individual. Another thing is, kind of in a line with the positivity focus. You may be asked to support someone. I've been asked by different lovers to, I want you to support my creativity or do this, and, be supportive to this idea. And the most supportive thing that you can do in general is to provide accurate data, because accurate data lets you succeed. For example, if I say, this is a hand here, come and meet my hand, you can do it. But if I say there's a hand here and it's not there, you can't do it. How can you connect? Because I'm lying. There's an inaccurate map of reality. There's nothing to connect with. So usually the best way to support people is by giving them a balanced picture of the full terrain and taking the time to learn who they are. It's great to say that 90% of all people singing, for example, are never going to make a big living singing. If that's the statistic in the culture that you're in, that's good information to know. To say, okay, you're sitting down at a table that has a 70% chance of failure in this culture if you want to make money by it. So then you have to take the time and say, okay, is this important enough to you that you're willing to do it in your spare time? For example, do something else that has a high probability chance of succeeding, and then do this other thing. For example, these videos, they're important to me. And I'm in a culture where 99% of all content creators can't sustain themselves. So I just do it for fun. It's important to me. It's not important to make money with it. And so that's, and so you can't just give advice, but you also can't just encourage people to, flip over a cliff. And so what you want to do to a friend that you care about, or yourself if you care about, is first of all, you want to gather as much accurate data. For example, when I started creating content, I did a little bit of online reading. I found out that 98% of all self-published authors lose more money on a book, meaning they spend more money creating the book than they do from income from the book. And so my choice was then to say, okay, I'm going to cut the expenses and I'm going to make these books fun, and I'm not going to ever write a book to make money because I don't want to play with a 98% chance of losing. But there's a 100% chance that I'll win in the area that I'm playing, which is I put things into words so that I can understand them. And then I enjoy sharing that with other people who understand things a little bit more as well. And I enjoy hearing how someone's life benefited from this and that and the other. And I get to do all that. And so you want to give yourself and others an accurate sense of the probability field. You don't send someone to Vegas with $100 and high hopes of coming back rich, because 98% of people don't. So that's not what you encourage a friend to do. You do encourage, if someone's trying to build wealth, for example, real estate. Pretty good odds. If you are smart and do this and this and this with real estate, 80% of people make money versus 98% of people losing money. You want to enter a probability field in which you're likely to succeed at the thing that you're wanting to do. Now, this also involves taking the time to get to know the other person. Because if you are in that 2% of someone who has a true calling in that arena, and there is a certain percentage of people in that field that do make it, and that person has that ability, number one, and number two, is willing to put in the 10,000 hours it's going to take to get to that high level, and they understand the risks. You see, if they understand the risks, then they're going to work really hard, and they're not going to take it personally when the first year didn't make a dime, second year didn't make a dime, third year didn't make a dime. The woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love does a wonderful job of talking about, all the waitressing jobs and stuff that she did but her calling was writing. And she was very, very comfortable putting that first and supporting herself with odd jobs. However, I've gotten flack for bringing critical data into the field, data that is in the field that is alarming. And if you want to make money, it should alarm you that 98% of people lose money. Commodities is another field. I had a friend who wanted to be encouraged to invest money in commodities. I did a little bit of checking. 80% of people lose money in commodities. He's no brighter than any of them, so no, I don't encourage you to do commodities if you're trying to do it for fun. If you're trying to make money with it. If you're just playing around with $1,000 and you want to go at it. So that's, I think, an important distinction of support, setting people up to win with accurate data. And this also is not, this is very respectful. Meaning when you tell someone that this is really, really hard, starting a restaurant is another one. 9 out of 10 restaurants fail after a certain number of years. It costs an average of 30 to 200 grand in infrastructure to get started, and you're going to work your ass off. Now, if you know that, and you really want to do it, and you have the money to blow on that, and you are willing to devote the time, and that's your love, well, then you can really be honored because you've really accomplished something. You've done something that 9 out of 10 people are going to fail at doing. And that's something to be proud of. Versus saying, well, the universe is going to provide. If you're blessed by the universe, it'll just happen. And then they're thinking, well, why wasn't I blessed by the universe? You would have had to work harder and smarter, and in many cases been luckier than 9 out of 10 people. And then you can really be proud of that. Another thing is, as someone who enjoys thinking deeply, the comment, you're too much in your head. And the problem is not, I would just respond to that. Too much in your heart, too much in your head, etc. You do want to have an integrated reality, meaning you don't want to just think and never act. You don't want to just act and never think. You don't want to just feel and act. You want to find a balance of heart, mind, and body. And again, the culture benefits when there are a certain number of people who do really deep thinking, a certain number of people who do really deep science in this area, a certain number of people who their whole life is cello playing and whatever that is. And the key to ask is not whether you're more in your head or less in your head than somebody else, but is it serving you? Is it taking you where you want to go? Is your head your friend? And a lot of that gets back to, do you have clear vision? Do you have a good story? If you're in your head more than you're doing action and more than you're feeling, and you've got a faulty story and an immature ego, and you're focusing on the positive and you're getting hit by one surprise after another because you don't have a clear map, your head could be your biggest enemy. But if you will take the time to learn from people who study and succeed in this or that area, and two, if you will, stay in touch, use your mind to have a more and more intimate relationship with your partner. I'll sit down with my wife sometimes and we'll create a map of our relationship, and I'll say, this is what I see happening, and we'll have a whole hour discussion of this pattern and that pattern and this, that, and the other. And if we come out of that feeling closer and laughing and happy and we've mitigated conflict, then going in your head was the best thing for your marriage. If you come out of that not understanding the other person, not judging them, this, that, the other, and you've got a conflict on your hand, then it's not that going into your head was wrong, it's how you're using your head to create your reality. There's also a little bit of a push to go with the stereotypical things that are spiritual. So, if we have, this is one of my lovely crystals, and it's truly a magical presence. And it's in the spiritual stereotype category. Like crystals are spiritual, candles, for whatever reason, are spiritual. You burn more smoke in the atmosphere, you burn more carbon, all that. But there are these things that are called spiritual, a workshop, a meditating. It's valuable to look at the results. And I say that because, for example, when I first had some crystals, I got them because that was the spiritual thing to do. They didn't mean anything to me other than that. I didn't feel anything with them. I couldn't connect with them. So they weren't really doing that much for me. I might have been better going off and spending time building network relationships that would help me grow my business in terms of the amount of change it would have in my life. And that's the thing that, that I would just say is it's all spiritual. Spirituality is our relationship with what we honor that is bigger than ourselves. Spirituality is our relationship with what we honor that is bigger than ourselves. It is the relationship with other. So when we learn about ecology, we're learning about our relationship with a part of us that is bigger than this ego, with our interconnected relationship with the planet. And when we improve that relationship by, for example, the average American is going to generate 102 tons of garbage in a lifetime. That's kind of a little bit of a toxic relationship with a larger body, with our planet. So if you can cut that garbage down as an American to 50 tons rather than 102 tons, you're improving that relationship. And maybe doing a detailed analysis of how you're going to do that is more spiritual than buying a crystal. Maybe giving an ice cream cone to a kid and watching them smile to bring joy to people outside of yourself is more spiritual than sitting and scowling at the kids because they're not respecting your meditation practice. And so it's about developing a beneficial relationship with something bigger than ourselves, which include other people, which again gets into that dynamic where we have this superiority coming out of, I have the better yoga mat, you're too fat, you're eating that, you're not worth my time, is one of the biggest jokes around spirituality, because how can you develop a relationship with something bigger than yourself when you've already convinced yourself that you're better than that which is bigger than you? A culture is bigger than just you. So you've done your little thing and you're this and you're that and the other, and who cares about the rest of the culture? It's that caring for the rest of people that is the relationship with that which is bigger than you. There have been 10,000 cultures in human history. That means 10,000 stories and mythologies and languages for relating to that which is bigger than ourselves. The odds that ours is the only one that's right out of 10,000 is minuscule. It's 1 in 10,000, statistically speaking. And so it's important to break down these stereotypes and understand that someone that makes everyone smile in the room with their superficial jokes can be transcending. They may be looking around and saying, oh, this is a miserable room. How can I bring joy to this room? And go about doing that. And the best way to do that is to tell some idiotic jokes. It's like Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey may be one of the most spiritual movies because people laugh and don't feel judged and all of that. And so it's not as clear cut. Another thing that's, I think, important to look at is choice. and this ties in with the message, like you create your own reality, you're at choice, things like this. We're only at choice if we're conscious, number one, not only of the thing on a mental level, but if we're conscious of the domain in which we're interacting. We're only at choice if we're conscious of the domain that we're interacting with. For example, if you have an addiction and all you're conscious of is you have a craving for this, but you're not conscious of the underlying grief, you're not conscious of the underlying trauma, you're not conscious of the way it's affecting your life over the next 10, 20 years, you may not be at choice. It's kind of like this iceberg phenomena where, a few inches is sticking above the water, and then there's all this stuff underwater, under consciousness. And unless you can really see and start partnering, not just consciously, but with dynamics that you've hidden, that are taboo to be discussed in the culture, you may not be at choice. The second thing is, of course, in areas that are outside of our influence, either because the mass is too big. It's like, if you're in a crowd of 20 people and 20 people want to go this way and you want to push them the other way, you don't have the mass to do it. So you can try persuasion, you can try manipulation, you can get a gun and say, I'm going to start shooting you if you don't go the other way. And the gun may have the mass and the fear, and turn the fear, and so now you've got them going the other way. But there's many situations in which, 20 people, based on ignorance, fear, any other thing, they want to go this way, and you want them to go the other way. That's not your choice. But the same is true on the inside, meaning when you've got 20 terrified ages inside of you of young children that are scared and don't understand, and they all want to stampede towards the ice cream. And you're this one voice in there saying, that's not a good idea. Well, try telling 20 kids when you don't have, they're all inside you, so you can't fight them physically. You're going to be outnumbered. And so you're not at choice until you develop relationships with those parts of yourself that are impulsively acting in this way and this way. Now, once you develop that rapport, once they'll pay attention to you because you pay attention to them, once they trust you because you're trustworthy, once you honor them and so they respect you, then it can be that you say, that's not a good idea, and everyone listens to you because they've learned that good things come to them when they listen to that part within the psyche. If you don't develop that rapport and connection, you may spout off and judge and criticize yourself, and that's a dumb thing to do, and you'll do it anyway because you have not. The self is a very multifaceted part. The psyche is a very multifaceted organism. It's an ecology in there. And just like what happens in any government, in a democracy where people vote, anyone inside you can table a motion and say, how many people vote for going out jogging now? 35 people in there all say, never going to happen, get the hell out of here. You haven't got the majority vote within your body to go out and do that. And so that's an important thing to be aware of, these little nuances around choice. It's very common among poor people and idealists to blame rich people or successful people. And it's important to understand, first of all, that success is personally defined. And so if success is for you living a small carbon footprint and this and that and the other, then you have to honor success because it's going to take the same amount of discipline and thought and creativity and goal setting as it takes someone else to make their billion. So the first thing is to differentiate that we're all moving towards our version of success, number one. And number two, that many energies are neutral, money being one of them. You can use money to help cure cholera. You can use money to bribe a hitman. You can use money to get yourself fat. You can use money to addict yourself on opioids. You can use money to pay off all your debt and devote yourself to other people. Money is not the problem. The belief that money is more important than people, including you, is a big problem. When people's well-being and health are sold out because there's a perception that money is more valuable than human beings, there's a big flaw with that. But not everyone with money has that mistake. Some people are successful precisely because they respect other people more than average. They empower more people. They bring people together and help them achieve their dreams. And so they form this collective synergy and a dynamic partnership that creates tons of wealth for lots of different people. And so again, it becomes important to go into the nuanced detail and really learn and understand. And it's also worth noting that it is usually poor people, people who are barely surviving financially, who think about money the most. One of my goals was to reach a point where I had $30,000 in the bank as just there, not for long-term goals, not for retirement, just $30,000 just sitting there in my bank accounts. And the reason I wanted that was I wanted to be able to wake up every morning and think what's most meaningful and important for me to do and not think when's the rent due. And what that has done for me is it means I never balance a checkbook. The bank does it. You see, I don't need to balance a checkbook when I've got $30,000 in the bank, and I never usually spend more than $5,000 at a given chunk. And so I'm just not, I don't have to think about it. And so that's another little paradoxical thing, to really not think that much about money. Sometimes it helps to consciously see, because that doesn't just pop out of thin air. In order to do that, I had to break my addiction to adrenaline, because it was so exciting, always running on the edge. And it's like, am I going to have enough money this week? And I'm going to cover this check with this one and do this and do this. It's very exciting to be on the edge. It's lots of adrenaline and interaction and flurried activity. It's just all obsessing about getting enough money in the bank. So I had to break the adrenaline addiction. I had to change my planning habits. I had to develop discipline. I had to forgo expenses for a certain time. I had to build, there's a whole system going into creating that reality, a reality which, allows me a great deal of the time to wake up and say, I'd like to do this. And so I'm going to do it right now. I don't have to think about money. Another thing that is very popular I'm going to put this crystal down. I'm also getting really hot, so I'm going to take this off here. That's very popular is the idea of free love and free sex, and just, if you're spiritual, things just flow, and the idea basically that jealousy is bad and control is bad, and everyone should just be free, and if we would all just love each other, then that's great. And there's a very big danger in that domain, because what happens in a successful relationship is that a third energy is given birth to, and it is the probability field that is co-created by two very distinct human beings. Now, the physical expression of that is often a child, but the probability field on an emotional and energetic level is there in any two deep couple relationship. One. Number two, that probability field is like an electrical charge. Number three, it is bigger than either person. The probability field that is unleashed between two people is bigger than the probability field of either person combined. It is synergistic. And like a safe electrical circuit, it needs containment. It needs wires that are big enough to flow that current. It needs protections, otherwise it can start a fire, etc. And so it's very irresponsible to release a high volume of energy or probability and not respect its positive and negative potential. It is incredibly destructive, and it's the biggest reason why relationships are so traumatic at our present time. So the bigger the intensity of the probability field, the more critical it is to tend the containment of that probability field in a clear container with the people creating the energy. This is true in a group. This is true on an individual level. You need a container of expectations, a container of agreements, a container of boundaries, a container of intentions, a container of futures, and a container of discipline to work and balance those energies. That third energy becomes part of your body. If you want to, just watch people bring out the very worst in themselves, have a lot of free sex and intense emotions, and don't contain it in any way, and mess it around and block feelings and tell everyone that they're bad for being jealous and stuff, and you will have a completely disorienting mess on your hands. Now, another big thing to be aware of, if you do anything that's different because you've thought about it, etc., it's going to bring up the fear of the unknown in other people. Anything that is new comes with the fear of the unknown. And the fear of the unknown is one of the biggest human fears, in part because we're a traumatized culture. And when you have something unknown, the threat that the unknown represents is that I will be thrust and find myself in my trauma domain again. When you've been abused, when you've been lonely, when you've been overwhelmed and helpless as a child, one of the biggest vows that a traumatized child creates as a child and adolescent is, I'm never going to be in that place again. There's only one way to do that, and that's to make sure you don't go into unknown terrain and trust other people again. The value that culture provides is a status quo. And so you adjust to the culture, and you know what people are going to do in this culture. Anyone breaks that rule and says, I think we could do it another way, and it's this way, it brings up that fear. And the biggest way that people attack that fear is by saying, you're not normal, you're not conforming, so get out of here. And what they're really saying is, you're bringing up my fear of the unknown, I don't know how to deal with that, so I'll just get rid of you. But normalcy is not intelligence. Intelligence is the efficient conversion of energy into well-being. Normalcy destroys well-being as often as it creates it. So it is not the be-all and end-all, but you need to be respectful when you take other people out of their normal, because you will be the enemy, not because of you and not because of your idea. You will be the enemy because you are exposing them to the fear of the unknown. And anything that is unknown becomes the enemy in that domain. Another thing to be aware of is respect. Just have a very simple thing, and there's often a polarity that goes on in relationships that says, you didn't respect me, but you didn't respect me. And it's important to understand that respect is a form of sight. The Latin for spect comes from spectacles, to see, and respect, to keep seeing the other person. Now, when you respect someone, you see who they are positively and negatively. If you respect a virus, for example, the AIDS virus, you see what it is. You say, you're a virus that does this, and you get into my bloodstream in this way. I respect you. I'm not going to expose myself to you in that way because I see who you are, and I don't want that in my body. I respect you. When you study food and you look at it and you say, salt affects me this way, water affects me this way. So, in other words, respect is always mutual. When violation occurs, it is a problem. If two human beings are involved, it's a problem of mutual respect. Now, I'm not talking about, being raped in a dark alley and, hoodwinked, but even that is a matter of respect. If you look at the statistical data and says, 60% of people get robbed at 3 a.m. if they're wandering alone here, and if you're a woman, it's doubly so. If you respect the terrain, you don't go in there at 3 a.m. alone as a young woman. And so in order for that environment to disrespect you, you have to disrespect that environment. Now, this is not blaming anyone for not knowing, and it's not blaming, it's not saying you're bad because you didn't see that. You maybe didn't see that because you grew up in a culture that didn't teach you any of that. But on a technical level, you wouldn't have done it if you had known. And so there's a problem with respect. There's a problem with not knowing. When cultures don't respect their people, they don't teach them about trauma. Well, then the people don't know about trauma, so they don't respect themselves in traumatic terrain. When they don't respect themselves, they don't respect others, and there is a lot of violation. Evil is not a very popular thing to talk about, but it boils down to a continuum, where it's a direction, basically. It's a direction of disintegration of what's good and beautiful and true that you value. It's a movement towards devolution, becoming simpler and simpler. Like, if you let a microbe take over your whole body, you take the entire field of human consciousness and your whole probability field, and 3 days later you're a pile of mud with a few bones left over, as a single small microbe has dissolved the entire body. Evil is a direction that's taking one towards dis-ease, disintegration, lack of integrity, devolution, betraying what is most beautiful. That's leading you towards the sense of your spirituality, that ideal. And it's taking you in the exact opposite direction. It's a direction more than a point, because for someone that's, for example, considers smoking 8 packs a day evil, it's destroying their body faster than their body can build, so it's taking the body down. So if you're smoking, 8 packs of cigarettes a day, and you're working down every week, so now it's 7 packs, now it's 6 packs, now it's 5 packs, now it's 4 packs. 4 packs is a real success because you're going in that direction. For someone else who's happily coming along and then starts smoking 4 packs that day, they're going in the so it's not the point, it's not the position, it's the direction that you're moving in. And it's the direction that's very important to emphasize, to sidestep another thing, which is comparison and competition. You're better off, for example, if you want a strong fiscal future, you're better off if you're moving from, last year I had no money in savings, and this year I've got 5,000 in savings, and then this next year I've got 10,000 in savings. So I'm going up, I'm doubling my savings every year. And you've got someone else who won the lottery at 10 million, and they're halving their capital every year. You want to focus on the direction, not the position, because we all start at different positions in different arenas. So if you're moving forward, you're moving in a good direction. If you're moving backwards relative to your own values and ideals, you're moving in an evil direction. I heard a lot about, for example, that fear is the opposite of love, and A Course in Miracles, and fear is the enemy of love. It's easy to get caught, by the way, in a thing where once you decide that, for example, fear is bad, you can be afraid of having fear, just like you can be attached to being unattached. It's important to understand the diagnosis that an emotion is. For example, fear is a symptom of a reality, mentally, emotionally, or physically, in which, at a deep level, it may go down to something like, my love isn't good enough. I'm not going to succeed here. And that thought is going to create fear. I don't have the strength. I don't have the money. I can't make it here. It's very important to learn the message and make an assessment. It's like I'm setting off across America on a road trip. I've got $200. Fear comes up. I'm not going to have enough money. You look at it honestly. It's like, yeah, it's going to take me $5,000 in gas and all this and hotels to get across America. I've got $200. My fear is my friend. I'm going to learn from it. Okay, you're right. I'm going to get one day. So sometime in the next day, I'm going to have to come up with a plan. And action is usually the remedy of fear. Action is usually the remedy of fear. And the healthy response is, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have enough money, is, okay, let's see how much I'm going to have. Let's see how much I'm going to need to make. Let's make a list of all the things I could do to make it. And let's really start working on that, because you also want to be realistic and say that not all of these things are going to work out. So I want a plan A and a plan B, and I want to really work that. And lo and behold, the fear dissolves on its own. You don't have to judge the fear for giving you accurate information. And the key is to go deeper into reality. If you're afraid that your partner doesn't love you, go into it. Let's make a list of all the things you don't like about me. Let's make a list of all the things you do like about me. Let's look at the direction that I'm moving in those areas. It's like you don't like my criticism, and I'm steadily becoming more critical. Okay, that's a good fear to be aware of. Am I going to do anything about that? Am I either going to become extra nice in this other area to compensate for the fact that I'm not very nice in this area? Or am I going to do something to respond to be more attractive so that that's a reasonable supposition? It not being a very reasonable supposition in a free country to expect someone to love you eternally when you're treating them like shit in an increasing vector of shittiness. I want to say a few critical things about therapy, because it's worth mentioning, again, in this paradoxical and play devil's advocate a little bit in this terrain. So a therapist is someone who is not going to take action. Like if you say, oh, I'm being raped and da-da-da-da-da, for the most part, a therapist is not going to go and take action and confront your rapist and da-da-da-da-da. So that's, one thing. They're not going to take, if you're an addict, a therapist is not going to come and help you throw out your stuff or sit with you through the night as you're going through withdrawals and all that. So a therapist is not going to take action. In many cases, they're not going to partner with your community and let them know what's going on. They're going to keep it completely secret. And they're the one person who's not usually part of the problem. And so you're going to drive and take time out of your life, and you're going to go to someone's house at their appointed schedule, and you're going to sit there and say some things. And, there are some some pitfalls to this paradigm. One of them is that, if you're only telling your most important feelings to your therapist, why? Because they're the only person that doesn't really need to know them in your life, and other people do. One. Two, your negative feelings are not the enemy. Everyone should be aware of your positive and negative feelings about a variety of things. And I'm not talking about environments. You have to be respectful that we have a work culture in which feelings are not really welcome. And so, if you understand what you're dealing with, as toxic as it may be, then you're not going to get fired for telling people your feelings. But, in the darkest sense, you're taking time out of your life to pay someone money who's not going to do anything about it, to listen to the feelings that don't really affect them, and then you're going back in your life. And having done a lot of that with multiple different therapists, there is a dark side of it. You can just go on and do that endlessly, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a dynamic life change. And there are many different models of therapy. And going and paying someone to listen to stuff that has nothing to do with them is not necessarily the best model for responding to every situation. We do have, the general message of love, but we have a big blind spot in our culture that we don't have a very clear vocabulary about the many types of love. I wrote a small book called Faces of Love just to begin to touch on that. But it's one of the reasons why saying I love you is such a fear trigger for so many people, is because love is a word. The behaviors associated with love are whatever you've had in your life when people said that word. That's the way language works. So if your parents hit you and said, we're doing this because we love you, when you say the word love, your body remembers the hitting. Now, when that doesn't get sorted out, someone says, I'm going to love you, and your body gets terrified. Because it's saying the last time someone said that word, I got hit. The last time someone said that word, I got dumped. The last person someone said that word, they were nice for a week and then they started humiliating me. Do I want that? And it's whatever you've associated with that word. It's not what's in the dictionary, which is very vague, and most people can't define love from a dictionary anyways. And so love can be a very charged topic, because it's been misused and mislabeled and misunderstood, and we just don't have enough training in that area. I'm going to take a little break, and we'll come back.